LGBTQ+ stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, plus many other identities of folks who are marginalized based on sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. While there are commonalities, it is important to remember that the LGBTQ+ community is not monolithic. There are differences in lived experience based upon the constellation of identities a person holds. Kimberly Crenshaw used the term intersectionality for a particular form of analysis of the impact of the intersection of multiple systems of oppression on a person's life. A Black queer person, for example, is situated at the intersection of the system of racism and heterosexism. This shapes the nature of the types of prejudice, harassment, and discrimination they are likely to experience. It influences how they will experience their identities and influences the type of resources that are beneficial. As an example, research has documented that Black LGBTQ+ youth experience discrimination based on racial and sexual identity, are less likely to come out publicly as being LGBTQ+, and benefit from resources that specifically address both their racial identity and their sexual identity. So while I will be talking through this presentation about the LGBTQ+ community, please remember there are vastly different experiences for people depending upon the constellation of identities they hold. One theoretical framework that is useful for thinking about being an ally is invitational counseling theory. This theory poses that no space is neutral and that there are 4 ways to interact with someone based on how intentional and how inviting one is. You can be intentionally disinviting, unintentionally disinviting, unintentionally inviting, or intentionally inviting. Intentionally disinviting is intentionally doing things that exclude, discriminate, or marginalize people. For example, refusing to use someone's chosen name or pronouns. Most folks who come to ally trainings aren't intentionally disinviting. Rather, they are unintentionally disinviting, meaning that because of a lack of awareness, knowledge, or skill, they do things unintentionally that exclude, discriminate, or marginalize people. Examples of this would be assuming pronouns incorrectly based on someone's perceived gender expression. Sometimes people are unintentionally inviting, meaning they accidentally do things that are inviting, but are doing so without awareness or intention. An example of this would be correctly guessing someone's pronouns. The problem with being unintentionally inviting is that you don't know what you're doing correctly, so you can't replicate it. The place I want everyone to get is to have the awareness, knowledge, and skills to be intentionally inviting to LGBTQ+ people. That is, doing things intentionally that result in an inclusive and welcoming environment. An example of this would be to introduce yourself with your pronouns and ask others about theirs. One thing necessary to being an ally or to be intentionally inviting is to have an understanding of the language and terminology used by a community. The next part of the training is devoted to talking about some language and terms that you are likely to hear in reference to sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. As I talk about terminology, it is important to remember that language is fluid and contested. By fluid, I mean that the ways particular words are used often differ or change over time by geographical region, socioeconomic status, etc. By contested, I mean that different groups within a given community may have very different opinions about meanings of words or appropriate use of words. Thus, I do this section not to define the one right definition of a term, but rather to give you a better idea about what people might mean when they use particular terms in this area of the country at this particular time. One thing I like to say is that sometimes being a good ally is knowing what questions to ask. For example, when working with a student and they say identify as queer, you could ask, would you be willing to tell me what that means to you? Because I know it can mean a couple of different things. On this slide, you can see all the terms we are going to be defining in this activity. While I sent the match game to everyone before this training, I know that not everyone has a printer. Plus, I want to make sure that everyone has access to closed caption explanations of each term. With all of that in mind, here's what I'm going to do. The next 18 slides contain the definitions for each of these words, one per slide. Each slide also has these 18 words listed across the bottom of it, so you don't have to worry about remembering them. For each slide, I'll read the definition and then I'll pause the video so that you can type in the letter of the term you think best corresponds to the definition. Then I'll start the video again so you can learn the correct answer along with some extra information about each term. I'll also pause the video periodically so that you can ask any questions you have about terms that weren't answered in the video. The first definition is a term used to refer to the way one's sex is classified at birth as male, female, or intersex based on anatomical, chromosomal, and hormonal characteristics. Which of the listed 18 terms do you think best fits this definition? Please write your response in the Zoom chat box now. Hopefully some of you said N, assigned sex at birth. People used to make a big distinction between sex and gender, where sex was the biological and gender was socially constructed. But when you consider intersex characteristics, you begin to see that even at the level of biology, social construction is occurring. Also, in the majority of states, there are only two legal options, male and female, which sets up a gender binary into which society tries to force all people. This leads us right into the next definition. This next term is a term used to refer to individuals born with biological sex characteristics that may not fit a doctor's notions of binary male or female bodies. Some traits are identified at birth, while others may not be discovered until puberty or even later in life. What term best fits this definition? The correct option is L, intersex. It's a lot more common than people think. It's difficult to give an exact number because that depends on how you are defining intersex. Research says 1 in 2,000 people are born with genitalia that is not easily classified into our binary system. However, when you look at all individuals who have chromosomes, hormones, and primary or secondary sex characteristics that do not match up in the way we assume they would in a strict binary system, the number is much closer to 1 in every 100. Children are often assigned a sex of either male or female at birth because those are the only options on birth certificates in most states. As of May 2020, 9 states allow a third gender option on birth certificates. Typically, society doesn't allow or encourage raising intersex kids as intersex. They get assigned as either male or female. But the recommendation now is to do only medical surgery that is necessary on the bodies of children. For example, if there is no opening for urine to leave the body, that requires surgical repair. However, if there is a urinary opening at the base versus the tip of a penis, that is not medically necessary surgery. The goal is to let the person choose any surgical interventions once they are old enough. One place to learn more on intersex is the Intersex Society of North America's website, isna.org. Even though the ISNA is no longer active, they have left their website up as a clearinghouse of info on intersex characteristics. Does anyone have any questions about assigned sex at birth or about intersex? The next definition is the gender an individual identifies as psychologically, regardless of what gender they were assigned at birth. What term best fits this definition? The correct option is F, gender identity, and this leads us right into our next definition. The next definition is how someone performs or expresses themselves in appearance, behavior, speech, or other mannerisms. This may or may not be analogous to their gender identity. Which term best fits this definition? The correct option is G, gender expression. A person's hairstyle, clothing, accessories are all aspects of their gender expression. However, while society associates certain things with certain gender identities, Those things don't necessarily indicate anything about someone's gender identity. Someone can have long hair and wear makeup and have dangly earrings and identify as a man, as a woman, as non-binary, or in some other way. So it's important to remember that gender identity and gender expression are two different concepts. One's gender identity may or may not align with their gender expression, so be careful with those assumptions. For example, someone's gender expression may read as masculine based on societal norms, but they may identify as genderqueer. Another example is that someone may identify as transgender, but because of job, family, and economic resources or a multitude of other reasons, one may not be able to reflect that in their appearance. Are there any questions about gender identity or gender expression? The next term is sometimes used within American Indian or Native American communities to refer to someone whose gender identity does not align with their assigned sex at birth. Which term do you think this is? The correct option is M, two-spirit. Not all American Indian people will use the term two-spirit, but if someone tells you they are two-spirit, they are telling you something about their cultural and ethnic identity. Reverence for two-spirit people was important to many indigenous North American nations before European colonies arrived and began to exert their influence. Using this term is often a reclaiming of one's cultural and ethnic heritage with their gender identity. Are there any questions about the term two-spirit? Term 6 is a term used to describe an identity that encompasses both man and woman, neither man nor woman, or beyond man or woman. Which term is this? The correct option is H, non-binary. The terms genderqueer or gender fluid may also be associated. There are many options for how someone could identify in terms of gender. It's important to recognize that gender identity is not limited to two mutually exclusive dichotomous options, but that there is a range, a spectrum, or a universe of options. The seventh word is an umbrella term used to describe a loose association of people who do not adhere to cultural gender norms in a wide variety of ways. It is also used to refer to people whose gender identity differs from their assigned sex at birth. Which term best fits this definition? The correct option is J, transgender. There is some debate around the meaning of transgender. Increasingly, people see it as an umbrella that includes non-binary and gender non-conforming people, while some use the term transgender to refer to people moving away from the binary identity they were assigned at birth towards the other binary option. Also, when I talk about transition, it's important to understand that transition looks different for each person. Some people transition socially, changing the way they dress or the name they use. For others, they medically transition, so they use hormones or have surgeries that affirm their gender identity. There are a number of medical procedures, so it is incorrect, not to mention an invasion of privacy, to ask whether someone has had the surgery. There are many gender affirming surgeries which are very expensive and often inaccessible to many. People may or may not transition legally by changing their legal name and gender marker on government-issued identity documents, for example, driver's license or passport. I often get asked about the term transsexual. Transsexual is an older term that was very rigidly rooted in the binary and often focused on medical transitioning. You should never refer to someone as transsexual unless they have told you that is how they identify. You also used to hear people use the terms pre-op or post-op to designate if one had medically transitioned, but you don't hear this distinction as often these days. Also, when you hear a term like transfeminine, the thing that matters is the last part of the term. Someone who is transfeminine is someone who identifies more with the feminine portion of the gender spectrum. Transmasculine is someone who is assigned female or intersex at birth, but identifies more with the masculine portion of the gender spectrum. It's important to remember that the identity someone was assigned to is not what is important. It's not who that person was perceived to be at birth that's important for interacting with them. How they identify now is what matters. The legal sex or assigned sex at birth may matter for paperwork or certain medical situations, but not for how you interact with them. A good resource to learn more about transgender communities is the National Center for Transgender Equality. Are there any questions about the term transgender? The eighth term is one used to refer to a person whose gender identity aligns with their assigned sex at birth. Which term do you think best fits this definition? The correct option is I, cisgender. Cisgender comes from the prefix cis, meaning same side, and is used to distinguish between transgender and non-transgender people without using terms that are disrespectful, like real man or real woman. Further, the term cisgender allows us to discuss the privileges that come along with having a gender that aligns with sex assigned at birth. For example, a cisgender person whose gender expression aligns with societal norms can use the bathroom that aligns with their gender without any pushback or threat of violence. Cisgender is only talking about gender identity and assigned sex at birth. A cisgender person's gender expression can align with societal expectations or not. The next term refers to how someone self-identifies their sexual feelings and desires, or describes who they are open to being in a sexual relationship with. What do you think is true for number 9? The correct option is E, sexual orientation. It's who you're open to being in a sexual relationship with. Sometimes people confuse sexual orientation and gender identity. One overly simple way I've heard this described is that a person's sexual orientation is who they would like to go to bed with, and their gender identity is who they go to bed as. You can further break sexual orientation down into attraction, behavior, and identity. People might have sexual attraction that they do not act on, or people might engage in sexual behavior, but not self-identify with the sexual identity that often corresponds to that behavior. Now let's move on to a related term. The 10th term refers to how someone self-identifies their romantic feelings. What term do you think fits this definition? The correct option is R, romantic orientation. People are increasingly viewing sexual orientation and romantic orientation as separate. Romantic orientation speaks to one's openness to romantic relationships with people of the same gender, different genders, or irrespective of gender. People may describe their romantic orientation using terms like homoromantic, meaning romantically attracted to same gender, heteroromantic, romantically attracted to a different gender, or aromantic, not romantically attracted to any gender. Are there any questions about sexual orientation or romantic orientation? The next term was coined by activist Cleo Manago and is sometimes used by Black people to express an alternative sexual orientation. Does anyone know which term this is? The correct option is K, same gender loving. This term is typically used by Black people to express an alternative sexual orientation without relying on terms and symbols of European descent. Cleo Manago coined the term in the early 1990s because he felt like gay conjured up a white image of a white male and wanted a term that didn't do that. Further, white men were often centered in gay organizations and political activism due to racism and white supremacy. The term same gender loving allowed Black individuals to highlight the intersections of race and sexual orientation. The next term describes a sexual orientation characterized by low or absent interest in sexual activity, or describes a person who does not experience sexual attraction. What term is the best fit here? The correct option is P, asexual. Someone who is asexual may have a partnership even if sex is not a central feature of it. There is a lot of diversity within the asexual community in terms of romantic relationships and physical intimacy. Some asexual people form romantic or similarly intimate relationships, and the concept of separate sexual and romantic orientations originated within the asexual community. Also, like I've said about most concepts in this training, sexual desire is not a binary, but a spectrum. Many asexual people will talk about the ace or asexual spectrum, which includes identities like demisexual and gray sexual. There's a lot to learn, and I encourage you to check out the Asexual Visibility Education Network at asexuality.org. Are there any questions about asexuality? The 13th term is historically used to refer to a woman who is attracted to and may form sexual and affectionate relationships with other women. What term best fits here? The correct option is D, lesbian. The term became prominent in the 1970s as women pushed back against the centering of men in gay spaces and organizations due to sexism and patriarchy. People who identify as women who are attracted to other women may use other terms to describe their identity, such as gay, queer, or same-gender loving. This term is historically used to refer to a man who is attracted to and may form sexual and romantic relationships with other men. What term do you think fits here? The correct option is C, gay. Usage of the term gay has changed and differed significantly over time. At first, it referred to men and women who experience same-sex attraction. In the 1970s, more women began to identify as lesbian, and the phrase gay and lesbian was used to describe the entire community. Eventually, more identities were acknowledged within the community, leading to variations on the LGBTQ or LGBTIQA+ acronym. Some people still refer to the whole community as the gay community, and some women still identify as gay rather than lesbian. It's important to note that more recently, gay and lesbian has been conceptualized to referring to same gender attraction to acknowledge the breadth of biological variation within people who may identify as any one gender. Are there any questions about the terms gay or lesbian? The next definition typically refer to individuals who may feel sexual attraction to and may form sexual relationships with people of varying gender identities. Which letter do you think best fits this definition? The correct option is Q, bisexual or pansexual. For some, the terms bisexual and pansexual are synonymous, and some people use both terms to describe their sexual identities. For others, these terms are very different. The term bisexual has been used since the late 1800s and was often used to describe attraction to men and women. When people became aware of more genders that existed outside the binary in the early 2000s, some people wanted a new term that was less rooted in the binary and started using pansexual to mean attraction to all genders. However, many people use the term bisexual more expansively and describe their attraction as inclusive of attraction to most or all genders. Oftentimes, there is generational difference in who uses the term bisexual versus pansexual. In the mid-1900s, this term was used as a derogatory slang term and is still used by some in this manner. It can also be used as an umbrella term to refer to all LGBTQ+ people. It is often used by people who wish to challenge norms of sexuality and gender, as well as to defy identities and labeling. What term best fits this definition? The correct option is B, queer. This term started out as a slur and is definitely still used that way by some people, particularly in rural areas and particularly in the South. In the late 80s and early 90s, organizations like ACT UP and Queer Nation began a reclamation of the word queer. A common chant was, "We're here, we're queer, get used to it." In the 1900s, academia also began using the term, and academics started writing about queer theory. Queer theory is the study of the social construction of sex, gender, and sexuality. Some people use queer as an all-inclusive or umbrella term to refer to all people who identify as LGBTQ+. This usage is not accepted by the entire community. Queer can also be used as sexual identity label with a bunch of different meanings. Some may use it to mean they don't want to be categorized with anything else, or may mean they are politically active and intentional about furthering LGBTQ+ rights. The thing to remember about the term queer is that since it is so contentious, you should be careful about how and when you use it. If someone self-identifies as queer, you can use it to refer to their identity. However, if a person comes out to you as gay, don't describe them as queer unless you know it is a term they're comfortable with. Are there any questions about the term queer? This term describes the process of recognizing and accepting one's sexual orientation, gender expression, and/or gender identity. The term is also used to refer to the act of disclosing one's sexual orientation, gender expression, and/or identity to others. What term am I talking about? The correct option is O, coming out. A lot of people think coming out is when you tell someone your identity, but it really is a process. Everyone has a process of coming out to themselves, coming to terms with their own attraction or identity, accepting it, processing it, and then maybe coming out to other people. There are many developmental models of coming out. Also, coming out is not a one-time thing. Folks who are LGBTQ+ often have to decide many times in many different ways how comfortable they are to disclose information about themselves or their loved ones. For example, when you fill out an emergency contact form, it asks for the name of your emergency contact and then your relationship to that person. That's a sort of coming out. And when someone asks you what you did over the weekend and you decide whether or not to tell them about your date with a same-sex partner, that is also coming out. And when people come out about their gender identity as well, a trans person who emails their professor before the first day of class to let them know they use a different name than what is on the roster is coming out. So coming out is not a one and done thing, but rather an ongoing process. Are there any questions about coming out? The 18th and final term describes the societal and institutional reinforcement of heterosexuality as the privileged and the norm, and the assumption that everyone does or should identify as heterosexual. What term best fits this definition? The correct option is A, heterosexism. You can see heterosexism at work when people come out as lesbian, gay, bisexual, pansexual, asexual, etc., but not as straight, because we assume everyone is straight until they come out as something else. It's important to remember that heterosexism and sexism are really intertwined. Sexism defines two and only two genders, and that they are separate and mutually exclusive. Sexism also dictates how each gender is supposed to act, and how those two genders are supposed to interact with one another. If someone doesn't conform to those expectations, their sexual orientation then becomes suspect. There are many examples of heterosexism. People often are not intentionally excluding LGBTQ+ people, but frequently they create environments that are very heteronormative. These heteronormative environments can make it difficult for LGBTQ+ people to feel safe and included. Are there any questions about heterosexism? To wrap up this discussion, I want to again mention that my basic explanations of these terms and phrases are not the one and only right definition. Language is fluid and contested. Remember also that I'm offering you definitions of terms not so you can stick them onto people, but so you can better understand what people mean when they use them. And remember also that sometimes being a good ally is knowing what questions to ask. For example, when working with a student and they say, I identify as queer, you could ask, would you be willing to tell me what that means to you? Because I know it can mean a couple of different things. Are there any lingering questions about language or terminology?